This is the Standing Committee on Citizenship and Immigration, meeting number 7, Tuesday, November 1st, 2011. The orders of the day are, this is a televised meeting, and this is pursuant to Standing Order 1082, study of the immigration application backlogs in light of the action plan for faster immigration. The meeting will be divided, will be shorter because of our meeting in camera for the first 15 minutes. We have two witnesses that are present here in Ottawa. Martin Collicott, who is the spokesperson for the Centre for Immigration Policy Reform. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
You appeared for Bill 11 in the past, and we appreciate your coming again. We have Mr. Justin Taylor, who is the Vice President of Labour and Supply, Canadian Restaurant and Food Services Association.
Good morning.
We have via teleconference from Burnaby, British Columbia, the other end of the country, Mr. Roger Bahati.
It's not working.
It's not working. So hopefully by the time we proceed with the first two presenters, the video conference from Burnaby will be working. So each of you have up to 8 minutes to make a presentation, sir, and then members of the committee will have questions of you. Mr. Collicott, you may go first. You have up to 8 minutes. Thank you for coming, sir.
Thank you, Chairman. As I haven't had a chance to speak to most of the members of the committee before, I think only you and Mr. Dykstra have been on previous meetings I've been at. I'd like to just give a quick background on what my interest is in immigration, my connection with it. I was involved some years ago in programs for immigrants when I was the citizenship advisor for the Ontario government, and I was responsible for services to English and citizenship classes and teachers throughout the province. After that, I was sent by the Canadian International Development Agency to the Malaysian state of Sabah, where I spent 5 years training English teachers in Chinese schools, and that gave me some exposure to the immigrant experience in other countries. Later, when I worked for Foreign Affairs, I served as Canadian High Commissioner and Ambassador in a number of countries where there were high flows of immigrants and refugees to Canada. For the last 10 years, I've been a senior fellow at the Fraser Institute, and then last year we formed a new group, Centre for Immigration Policy Reform, to try and raise public awareness of immigration and refugee issues and encourage informed public debate on these topics. And I'm the spokesperson and chair of the advisory board. Finally, on a personal level, I mentioned my parents are both immigrants. They're from Britain. My wife's an immigrant from Asia, and some of my in-laws are boat people from Vietnam, which gives me an interest in refugee policy and issues. I'll make some comments about the backlog in general, as well as the backlog of sponsored parents and grandparents in particular, since the latter is perhaps most sensitive from a political perspective. With respect to the overall backlog, the problem has been developing for some years because until recently, Canada established annual targets levels, but not annual caps, which meant that the number of people applying to come here and who could meet the requirements were often much greater than what we needed or could absorb. In contrast, the U.S. puts an annual limit on how many people they'll admit, and then applicants are under no illusion. They may have to wait quite a long time to come in if they don't make the cut for the current year. And as Minister Kenny's pointed out, there's no shortage of people who want to immigrate to Canada. In 2008, the government wisely took action that gave it authority to give priority to the applications of those most likely to succeed in Canada and benefit Canadians. I would question the solution proposed by some that we raise our immigration levels in order to admit all those currently in the queue. There's abundant evidence we're already bringing in far more people than we need. I'm not going to have time to go through all the reasons why levels are much higher than they should be. I'll just mention a few. To begin with, the prosperity of a country doesn't depend on a constantly growing population or workforce. Our prosperity depends rather on having sound economic policies that stimulate increases in productivity and make the best use of our existing workforce, including women, Aboriginals, immigrants already here, and older people. Some claim that high levels of immigration are necessary if we're to meet our anticipated labor shortages. The fact is we already have potential labor forces and educational infrastructure that are required to meet all such shortages. One figure that has been given by Professor Marcel Meret of Ottawa University, is that he's a demographer, is that you raise the average current retirement of Canadians by 1 year from 61.2 to 62.2 years. That's the equivalent of bringing in an extra 65,000 high-qualified immigrants. And if you raise it to 65, you have a tremendous impact. And there's evidence that people are already starting to retire later. That began long before the recession, but it's accelerating. The Economic Council of Canada landmark study of the social and economic impacts of immigration that was done 10 years ago, concluded that immigration was not justified in today's Canada on either economic or demographic grounds. The study pointed out that almost all labour shortages could be met domestically if wages were allowed to rise and more Canadians were attracted by the higher pay and acquired the training necessary to fill the gaps. The head of the economics department at the University of British Columbia, Professor David Green, made the same points earlier this year when he told the annual Metropolis Conference that natural market responses to labour shortages such as pay hikes can be obstructed when immigration increases the supply of workers and thus reduces wages. And if you're looking at immigration as a major driver of economic growth, you're looking in the wrong place. And David Green, by the way, is also a research associate with the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives. Just last week, a committee of the Labour government in Australia issued a report saying there was little evidence to support claims immigration was an important driver of per capita economic growth or that it could alleviate the problems of an ageing population. Similar conclusions were reached in a House of Lords report in the United Kingdom 2008 and in a bipartisan committee of the U.S. Congress in 1997. I mention these points to underline that while immigration has played a major role in Canada's development at various times in its history, and Canadians are justified in viewing it positively, there is nevertheless strong evidence that current immigration levels are far higher than we really need and are very costly for Canadians. And the cost was touched on by previous witnesses who pointed out that it could be as much as $16 to $23 billion a year. And not only should the intake of skilled workers be significantly reduced, more emphasis put on the training and employment of Canadians, but other programs should either be reduced or eliminated completely. The live-in care program as a path to permanent residence, for example, is particularly ill-conceived and should be eliminated with minimum delay. Neither the investor nor entrepreneurial programs have much to justify, and the government has already begun some moves on that. There should be concern over the rapid expansion of provincial nominee programs. It's important that the provinces be consulted on immigration issues that affect them, but far too much authority has been delegated to them. As for what to do with the backlog, the action the government has taken to date to deal with it makes a good deal of sense. Give priority to those most likely to be a success and contribute to the economy. Although I'd qualify this by referring to my earlier statement to the effect that we're still taking in far too many immigrants, whether well-qualified federal skilled workers or not. What I'd suggest is that given the unexpected length of time many in the queue will have to wait to get their visas, they at least be given the opportunity to cancel their applications and receive a full refund for the fees they've paid. There is a legal obligation to process the applications that have been made to date. But we never guaranteed a particular time frame for letting people in, and I think the government's quite right in concentrating on those who we need the most. I'll conclude my remarks with a few comments on sponsorship of parents and grandparents. I think it's quite understandable newcomers would like to bring their parents and grandparents with them, but bringing them into Canada is very costly for Canadian taxpayers, particularly with regard to health care. Based on data summarizing the average health care costs of different age groups, a study released by the C.D. Howe Institute earlier this year, the health care costs of sponsored parents and grandparents who have come here since 1990 could amount to as much as $84.4 billion. And if you include all those who've come since 1980, the cost rise to over $103 billion.
Perhaps you could wind up soon, Mr. Callicott. You've got about 30 seconds.
Okay. These costs don't include old age security guaranteed income supplement. One final comment on parents is when Australia introduced tougher measures for bringing in parents, it was predicted that good immigrants won't apply because they can't bring their parents with them. That simply wasn't true. They got just as many applications. If you can bring your parents and grandparents with you, that's a bonus. If you can't, that's hardly going to be the deciding factor on whether you immigrate to another country. So that is a bogus argument. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, sir. I see Mr. Bahati. Can you hear us out in Burnaby, British Columbia? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, I'm going to...
I can hear you.
That's good. I'm going to speak to you in a moment. But first of all, we're going to hear from Mr. Taylor, who is with the Canadian Restaurant and Food Services Association. We thank you for coming. Sir, you have up to 8 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me here today. I'd like to start by acknowledging the many steps that the government has taken to respond to labour shortages in this country, in particular the decision to maintain immigration levels at their current levels throughout the recession, while many other countries chose to reduce numbers significantly. A little bit about the restaurant sector. We consider ourselves the unsung hero of the Canadian economy. We represent $63 billion in annual sales and 4% of Canada's GDP. Unlike other sectors, our industry is not only present in every province and territory, but in just about every single community across the country. Over 1 million full-time jobs exist in our sector, and we're the fourth largest private sector employer in Canada. We're among the top 3 tourist attractions to the country, and Canadians visit our establishments 18 million times a day. We're at the heart of ethnic communities across the country, and often how you can tell you're in an ethnic community is because of the high concentration of restaurants in that neighborhood. We do face some significant challenges with labor shortages. Our industry is traditionally youth-centric. Currently, 1 in 5 jobs in Canada for youth is in our sector. While many other sectors are seriously concerned about the looming labor shortage, the demographic shifts we're continuing to experience in Canada with fewer youth and an aging population has a very significant impact on our sector because of the high proportion of youths who traditionally work for us. According to the Canadian Tourism Human Resource Sector Council, the restaurant sector will face significant labour shortages by 2025, with over 142,000 full-year jobs projected to go unfilled. Currently, under the ministerial instructions, chefs, cooks, and restaurant managers can enter Canada under the Federal Skilled Worker Program. Our shortage will be in occupations requiring higher and lower degree of formal training. For example, we will be short 16,000 cooks and 47,000 food counter attendants. Even now, in these precarious economic times, our third quarter restaurant industry outlook indicated that 30% of restaurants are concerned about the shortage of qualified labour. Now, specifically on immigration in our sector, we are the #1 first-time job for Canadians. 79% of Canadians agree that working in a restaurant teaches you how to be part of a team. 59% agree that working in restaurants helps new Canadians develop crucial skills for life in Canada. And 51% agree that the restaurant industry is a great industry for new Canadians to gain experience in. Other sectors face significant challenges where immigrants come into the country but their credentials cannot be immediately recognized. Often foreign training and experience is highly valued in our sector. Immigrants from countries with strong hospitality or culinary culture thrive in our industry, and we have significantly lower problems with foreign credential recognition than other sectors. The explosion of ethnic cuisine in Canada means that foreign-trained chefs and cooks are in very high demand and are able to integrate into the labour force immediately. Because our industry will face shortages in occupations that require high and lower degree of formal education, immigration policies that allow workers with significant training and experience in our industry, as well as those that encourage young families to come to our country, are both important for our long-term success. We do note that there are some problems with backlogs in immigration currently, but that many of those backlogs have been significantly reduced due to the reforms in 2008. The current delays mean that primary applicants and their families are not able to immediately come to Canada to fill the jobs that are waiting for them. Individuals who are eager to come to Canada are therefore often coming in as temporary foreign workers, and this is putting increasing pressure on provincial nominee programs with some unintended consequences. For example, I recently was speaking to the head of human resources for a national chain who was saying that they're experiencing major problems in Alberta where they're bringing in temporary foreign workers only to have those foreign workers leave Alberta immediately and move to Saskatchewan where the PNP program is more generous. Also, this is creating problems for the arranged employment stream of immigration. This is a stream of immigration that is not well understood by employers in our sector, and there's significant concern about the uncertainty for processing times. Backlogs mean that employers cannot count on those employees to arrive in the time frame required, and often they'll have to fill those vacancies in other ways while waiting for those immigrants to arrive to Canada. We look forward to working with the government to help solve some of these problems and to increase awareness about this stream of immigration. I also wanted to provide a few concrete examples about success stories in our industry that many immigrants have had. I had the opportunity recently to meet someone who came to Canada 10 years ago, and their first job was as a dishwasher in a Swiss Chalet restaurant. They are now the proud owner of 2 Swiss Chalet franchises. I also had a bit of a different conversation with an Indian restaurant operator just north of Toronto who was complaining that he brings in Indian chefs, and after 3 years working for him, they keep opening their own restaurants, creating more jobs in our industry. So, in summary, the pending labour shortage that we will be facing means that Canadian restaurant operators are increasingly relying on a supply of new workers through steady immigration streams. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Taylor. Mr. Bahati, good morning to you. It's 8:30 out there. You had breakfast yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Well, you'll have to wait until after you speak. You're an immigration lawyer, sir, and we thank you for coming to make a presentation to the committee. And you have up to 8 minutes, sir. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm a lawyer who's been practicing for 27 years now in Surrey, British Columbia, and Surrey is unique in Canada. It's one of the most ethnically diverse and multicultural parts of this country, and the face of that community has been substantially changed by immigration. While there's been the inevitable growing pains in Surrey, the Greater Vancouver area really stands as a testimony to Canada's forward-looking immigration policies, including the principles of multiculturalism and family reunification. And I find this time and time again when I'm meeting with clients. And it's with those principles in mind that I address you on the issues of immigration application backlogs. Now, I know that the members of this committee have heard a lot of statistics, a lot of studies, and so forth. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples, very recent ones, of what's happening in the spousal category. Last week, a Nigerian woman, a woman originally from Nigeria, but now a Canadian citizen, came into my office and told me that she wanted to sponsor her husband, whom she'd recently married. She asked me what the processing time would be, and I looked it up on the immigration website, and the processing time in Accra, Ghana, which is the central processing center there, nearest to Nigeria, was 22 months. When you add the 70-day processing period in Canada for the sponsor's going to be waiting, this Nigerian Canadian, a minimum of 23 plus months, just under 2 years to sponsor her spouse. She then asked me what the waiting time was in China. I told her it was 4 months. She asked me why Nigerians were treated so differently. I didn't have an answer for her. And to the members of the committee, this woman deserves an answer. We shouldn't be treating sponsors and applicants differently in these categories according to what country they come from. We need to fund our consulates and processing centers in a manner which treats the applicants equally. We shouldn't have situations where the wait for a Nigerian sponsor or an applicant is 6 times the wait for a Chinese spousal applicant or an Indian spousal applicant. There's simply not enough justification for that. We have the resources. It's a matter of allocating them properly. A second example. Yesterday, a client who I've acted for many years called me. He had recently returned from Angola. Celso made a refugee claim in Canada several years ago. while Celso was waiting for his refugee claim to be adjudicated upon, the civil war in Angola ended. Now, a noticeable change in the way we reference rejected refugee claimants seems to be particular to recent years, where they are now being referred to, whether it be by the Honourable Minister or others, as bogus refugee claimants. Well, in this instance, this man was simply a victim of the civil war having ended, and his claim not being not a situation where his claim was not credible, but one in which it was no longer valid. In the meantime, Celso had been married to a Canadian woman, and they'd had a child. Celso was deported back to Angola. Now, one of the changes that this administration has made that has added greatly to the delays in spousal sponsorships has been the handling of the authorization for re-entry to Canada, the ARC. This is something that previously would add approximately 60, perhaps 90 days to an application in order for the person to get special clearance from the minister or the minister's delegate to return to the country. Celso phoned me yesterday to thank me for the work that I had done for him. It had taken him 3 years to return to his wife and child, a child that he doesn't know anymore, a wife who's not sure if they still have a relationship anymore. Certainly, there are things that can be done, tangible things, with respect to the allocation of funds, with respect to the handling of ARCs, that can speed up this processing. Clearly, with respect to the situation for parents and grandparents, I would submit that the suggestion that a 10-year multiple entry visa be granted to alleviate the difficulty for those waiting in the queue is an important consideration. It's a good suggestion. It's one which, in dealing with my clients, they definitely have a positive reaction to, and it is a positive step that would alleviate some of the distress that's been caused by the increase in the wait periods, which is now approaching 7 years for most parents and grandparents. But I'd close in saying that in my community, the presence of grandparents, parents, and extended families has added greatly to the cultural mosaic in Surrey. It's a success story. And whereas it's been said in other presentations that we should be looking to what other countries in Europe are doing, in fact, I think what you'll find, if you look at many of those studies, is that many of those countries are looking, and rightfully so, to this country, to what we've done and what we've done correctly, and a forward-looking immigration policy rather than simply a populist one. Thank you.
Mr. Badi, thank you very much. And I must say, the three of you, we appreciate the contribution that you've made to the committee and its work on trying to solve this backlog problem. And now members of the committee will have some time to ask questions. This segment of the meeting will end at 12:10. And so I will be strict on times. I may even cut you off in mid-sentence. Mr. Weston and then Ms. James, please.
Thanks, Mr. Chair, and thanks to our guests today. It gives me great pleasure, especially to welcome you, Mr. Collicott. I think that we often meet with people who devote themselves to the betterment of Canada, and I know you've done that. Disagree or agree with all of your opinions, you're constantly trying to make the country that you love better, and so thank you for being here today. I'm going to ask the one question and then move on to my colleague. Our immigration system, which was created in 2002, requires our government to process every application, no matter how many we receive. And Mr. Collicott, you pointed out that there's no shortage of people who are interested in moving to Canada. Does this make sense given that legal obligation? And if not, what would you do to change that?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Weston. Well, I suggested that at the moment I understand there is a legal obligation to process, and that's why in 2008 legislation was passed which said we can't possibly accommodate all these applications, so the minister has the right to simply not process some applications. Well, we do have this backlog under the old legislation that we're obligated, as far as I know, and the lawyers in CIC would know better, to process. But I don't see, and we can't possibly take in all of these people without swamping the system. And I don't see that we have a legal obligation to actually issue their visas within a specific length of time. This is a problem because we raised the expectations probably that they would be, but by the same token, we didn't anticipate getting all those applications. And it's a problem for the government. But I would simply have to say, okay, we'll process your application, but you won't necessarily get your visa because we have hundreds of thousands of other people trying to come in here. And if you want to withdraw your application, we'll give you your money back. Someone suggested with interest, which I don't take exception to. But this is the only sensible way to handle it. We're never going to bring in all of those parents and grandparents. Why not give them their money back if they'll take it? Or otherwise they can just wait. And unfortunately, many of them will probably be dead before they get their visas. But we've just had 35,000 more applications for parents and grandparents last year. So just about everyone would like to bring their parents and grandparents. It's a great boon. I mentioned it could be up to $100 billion in their health care costs. So why not bring in your parents and grandparents?
Sorry, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is actually to Mr. Collicott as well, and I'm just going to kind of go on with what my colleague John Weston has mentioned. If you could think of 3 recommendations that this government could do to help reduce the backlog, I'm just wondering what those 3 were. And actually a previous witness and colleague of yours had actually stated the federal government had lost control over immigration and urgent reforms were needed. And I think that we can all agree with that statement because that's the reason why we're here studying backlogs. So I'm just wondering if you could give me 3 recommendations that you think would help this situation the most for Canada, if you could just mention those very quickly. And I know that you touched on several of them before, but just 3, possibly 3 top recommendations.
Okay. Well, there are concerns in different areas. I didn't mention our humanitarian program, but I think we need a total revisit of our refugee program and humanitarian program. We should definitely establish annual levels so that we're not misleading applicants. They know that if they don't fit into the current quota, they don't have expectations that they're going to come in quickly. I think we should have done that years ago, and I don't know why we didn't. Certainly in the case of parents, we should that program should really be revisited. The Liberals, in fact, looked at it back in 2004, and they realized it was costing us a mint. They reduced the intake to 1/3. There was pressure from immigrant communities, and the next year the levels shot right back up. They knew that something had to be done, but they got cold feet. And I hope this government, after much discussion and getting everyone's input, I hope this government hangs in there. This is a program which is hugely costly. So I think refugee policy needs to be looked at. I think overall levels have to be looked at. There is no reason why we have among the highest net per capita immigration levels in the world. And I think in terms of the backlog, we just have to bite the bullet and say there's a lot of people in that backlog that we can't accommodate, and they should have to accept it. Now, there will be terrific opposition from immigration lawyers, from immigration advocacy groups, and there should be a public debate on this. But I think that the facts, as far as I can make out, are quite clear as to what we need to do. I don't know whether I gave you three and a half, or 4. But I think
you got at least 3, so that's good. Thank you. I just wanted to also, you had made mention about, obviously we do have an immigration backlog problem. It's 1 million plus at this point in time. You had made mention about the United States. I believe you said caps per year. And I'm just wondering whether you can kind of make mention of what other countries are doing, such as in the UK, Australia, New Zealand, how they're dealing with immigration and how they're dealing with their backlog situation, if they have any.
I'm not sure what their backlogs are, but they've certainly tightened up in certain areas. The UK has. Australia, in fact, passed legislation back in the 1990s in terms of backlogs of parents because they were getting huge numbers of applicants. They said basically two things. If you want to bring your parents in, you pay for the medical costs because they're considerable. The other interesting thing was they said we'll operate on the balance of family. That is, if the program's based on reunification of families and bringing them back together, it doesn't make sense if the parents, most of their children are somewhere else. So at least half the children have to be in Australia and or in some other country than where they're coming from. That cut down the numbers rather dramatically because under our system, if you're a sponsored parent, you can bring all the sponsor's siblings with you without them having to meet any requirements but health and security. That makes it a very attractive proposition for someone who has 4 or 5 siblings. They can come in, and in some cases they can get engaged to someone from back home whose family will pay up to $50,000 to marry a Canadian, and then they can bring in their parents, and you begin a whole new chain. So one of the things the Aussies did was they said balance of family. You can't bring your parents in unless at least half their kids are already, or you're splitting the family up. You're not bringing it back.
Thank you, Mr. Collicutt. I'm afraid our time has expired. Mr. Davies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to particularly welcome Mr. Batty to the committee, who is from the West Coast and is joining us by teleconference. Mr. Batty, I want to focus a bit on one of your suggestions that you raised. We have over 1 million applications in the backlog worldwide. Figures given to this committee were that 150,000 of those applications were parents and grandparents in the queue. And one suggestion that has come before this committee is that we create a 10-year multiple entry visa that we could give to these parents as a means of alleviating the backlog on the assumption that a large percentage of those parents will withdraw their application for citizenship if they could get a 10-year multiple entry visa and then just come and visit their children where they want. In researching this, I find that Canada has had a 5-year multiple entry visa that's been available to people. And just this summer, I found a press release from the government saying that they increased that to 10 years, but nobody seems to have heard of it. Members of this committee thought that this was a good idea to create this visa. Members of this committee weren't even aware we had such a visa. So I'm thinking that this 5- and 10-year multiple entry visa is either not used very much, not publicized very much, or not granted very much. So I'm wondering if you could give us your experience as an immigration lawyer. How many people, how many parents are getting 5- or 10-year multiple entry visas now?
It's not happening often. There's a level of lack of knowledge in the communities that sponsor most of these parents of such avenues. And so there's, when I raise the issue with clients, they're often surprised to discover that there is even such a concept available to them. So it's underutilized. When I do discuss it with clients, they more often than not regard it as a very attractive alternative. For many of the families, they have a cultural aspect of living in extended families, and their parents often still want to maintain some kind of presence in the home country or be able to visit there again. At the same time, the 10-year multiple entry visa is going to allow our medical system some benefit that these visitors will then be obtaining private insurance for their visits, and the potential concern with the stress and strain on Canada's social structure will no longer be as acute. So it's, I think, a very good alternative, one which my clients, once they're made aware of it, are very much in favor of. Of course, my clients, being Canadians, are very much aware of the impact that their relatives, their parents or grandparents' arrival in Canada may ultimately have on the Canadian healthcare system. It's also important to note that these people undergo rigorous medical examination under what we have seen in the courts has been a lower and lower threshold in terms of what constitutes medical inadmissibility. So when these people arrive in Canada, they're not arriving with illnesses, and they're not arriving with pre-existing conditions. They're healthy. So that's an important factor to note. But I do think that this would be a very attractive alternative that provides a number of benefits, allows the social structure to maintain itself while allowing some family reunification on a regular basis.
Mr. Taylor, I had the pleasure of meeting with several of your members a week or two ago, and if I understand the perspective of the restaurant industry in Canada, it's that you do perceive a looming skills shortage that cannot be filled by domestic Canadian population, and you would like to see in the temporary foreign work program that expanded to permit more of those workers who come and get trained and established in your members' establishments the opportunity to perhaps apply for permanent residency, maybe like the live-in caregiver program, where if they come and work for 2 years in a 4-year period, they could then have a path to permanent residency. And if I understood your members' response, they thought that would be a good thing because after going to the trouble of training and getting established, they would like to hang on to these workers. Can you tell me, is my understanding correct in that regard?
That is correct. And many provinces, through their PNP programs, currently do have similar programs where after working a period of time as a temporary foreign worker, you can apply for permanent residency. Initially, when we supported these types of policies, we were concerned that workers would simply leave once they become permanent residents, leave our industry, move to different parts of Canada. And we've done follow-up studies with our members, and we've found that the folks who come to Canada as temporary foreign workers working in our industry gain experience, end up moving up through the chain in the restaurants, and once they are sponsored for permanent residency, stay in the restaurants. We've had very little complaints about the loss of that labor. So this is definitely a policy that would be very attractive to us.
Thank you. My last question.
Less than a minute.
Mr. Collicott, if I understand your testimony correctly, you don't think that we need immigration to meet Canada's domestic labor needs. Citizenship and Immigration Canada on their website says that Canada, because of aging population and reduced birth rates, we will be dependent upon new immigrants for 100% of our new labor growth in 5 years. So I'm going to ask you whether you think CIC is wrong about that. And my second question is, the Conservatives, when they took power, increased immigration levels from an average of 220,000 a year to 254,000 a year, a 14% increase. Last year led in 280,000, the highest in half a century at 0.8% of population. Do you think that they were incorrect in doing that as well?
Yeah. Well, first of all, yes, the statement that our increasing labor force will depend entirely on immigration is correct. In a sense, I've already answered that, though. The increase in the size of the population or the labor force is irrelevant. And I think in that sense, that statement's rather misleading. It implies, well, because 100% of our increase will depend on immigration, we've got to have it.
Going to stop there, Mr. Collicott. We'll have to move on to Mr. Lamoureux.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If you listen to the government and the messaging that's kind of going out through the Minister of Immigration is that they are setting the framework to introduce caps. That's what I believe. A big question is, once you implement caps, what you're really saying is there's hundreds of thousands of people that will likely never get the opportunity to come to Canada. So it is a bit of a slippery slope. Having said that, the question I have for you is, you make reference to the U.S. You put in a cap. How do you, in a very short way, if you could, please, implement a cap? How do you say no to the hundreds of thousands of people that want to come in? What would be your primary source? Would it be a lottery? What would you suggest the committee look at?
Yeah, I mean, the Americans do have a portion of their immigration program as a lottery, as you know. I think that's ridiculous. I think you have to set your caps, and then you decide on what basis you're going to accept applications. Up until now, it's been based on who makes their application first, and priority under the previous Immigration Act was given to family class. Now it's, I think the government's quite right in saying first priority should go on who we need. But the government can set standards and selection standards and choose from the applications. I can't see why not. Who do we really need, and who's going to benefit Canada the most?
Okay. Mr. Taylor, we're making reference, and I appreciate the efforts and the challenges within the restaurant industry, very much so, and I think the association does a fabulous job in terms of representation. Having said that, there is many that will argue that, look around Canada, there's people in Canada, if we invest in them and we train, that they would be able to fill these jobs. I, for one, don't believe that would work, that we do need to bring in immigrants, foreign workers, to be able to sustain the industry. Can you provide a comment to those individuals that would say that, you know, within Canada we have enough people to meet those employment opportunities?
Well, that's a difficult question to answer. Right now, as a matter of fact, one of my colleagues is testifying before the Finance Committee. One of our recommendations is to remove many of the disincentives to work through EI reform and other types of reform. So I do think that the response to labor shortage cannot simply 100% be focused on immigration. Immigration needs to continue to be a component. We are seeing long-term demographic shifts that mean that there will be fewer working-age Canadians. And there was a mention earlier about the statistics for just simply replacing our labor force. But we are actively working to try to attract underrepresented groups as well, those that are chronically unemployed, but there must be a multi-pronged approach to addressing labor shortages across industries in Canada.
And Mr. Boddy, when you made reference to the visiting visas, I want to look specifically in terms of spouses. We talk about parents and grandparents and having those multiple-year visas. What about where we require visas that, in fact, spouses be allowed to come while they're under process? Is this something in which you can maybe provide comment on, the benefits of it?
This is something that, in my experience, is very rarely utilized. The instances in which spouses or prospective applicants are granted visas are few and far between. One of the reasons for that, I would think, to be presumptuous of CIC's approach, is that they feared that a subsequent application would be made from inside Canada, since there is a process to be sponsored within the country. Certainly, that could be alleviated if the applicant entered into an undertaking not to file such an application from inside Canada. It could be made binding upon the applicant, and that as well could alleviate some of the discrepancies that we see between...
Mr. Boddy, more specifically, those individuals that are actually married, they go, let's say, to India or they go to the Philippines, they get married, and allowing their spouses to be able to return using visas.
We've got about 30 seconds, Mr. Lamoureux.
If you could provide comment on that.
Yes. Again, that rarely occurs. Generally, when spouses are married in a country such as India or in any country, they have to be sponsored in order to be able to return. If they apply for a visitor's visa, they're very likely not going to get it. However, there would be a mechanism to make that easier if the person undertook not to file a sponsorship application from in Canada and actually was required to file from outside Canada before they applied for the visa.
Thank you, Mr. Boddy. Mr. Opitz and Mr. Lung.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is to Mr. Bhatti. The NDP has asked for a significant increase in the proportion of family members and refugees we accept every year compared to economic immigrants. So I want to clarify these proportions. Family members actually currently constitute the highest proportion of immigrants we let into the country. albeit through different streams. So are you suggesting an increase in the number of family members at the expense of economic immigrants?
The way you pose the question is an either-or situation. I think it's a situation where a forward-looking aspect of policy can contemplate increases in both. It doesn't have to be an either-or situation. We've seen tremendous success in our family reunification program. We've seen tremendous success in our skills immigration programs. I believe it's possible to increase both.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is for both Martin Collicott and also Justin Taylor. In the Canadian Centre for Immigration Policy reform indicates that there's a tremendous cost associated with training immigrants to perform certain jobs. And at the same time, I'm hearing from Mr. Taylor that, yes, we need to bring in these skilled workers to handle some of the first entry jobs. There seems to be a mismatch here because, we're faced with retraining our own people, retraining immigrants that we bring in. Why are we not providing these employment opportunity for Canadians?
Well, as for the immigrants, I think better selection is going to have a better match of their skills with what we require. The Australians are, for instance, on credentials, are required that before they get a visa, their credentials are going to be accepted in Australia. On the other question, it's a broader question, though. If you don't bring in immigrants, wages will go up, including in the restaurant industry, and you're going to have to pay people more money. And both the Economic Council of Canada found and David Green at UBC found out that enough people will take training. And when I say Canadians will, that includes immigrants already here. But normal market forces will take care of most, not all of the needs. Some of them are too long-term, but probably 95% of labor shortages will be taken care of when wages go up and more people take the train. It's not as fast as bringing temporary workers. That's the quick way of doing it, and they work hard, and they're but you keep wages down that way. So it's a bit complicated, but those are the basic issues.
I'd like to hear from Mr. Taylor, please, on that same issue.
Well, sorry, as far as employing more Canadians, we think that there needs to be steps taken to reduce the disincentives to work in Canada. We have a number of examples across the country where folks are saying that they would prefer to continue to collect employment insurance because of the enriched benefits versus taking a part-time job or some of the jobs that are available in our sector. So that is a challenge that we do think needs to be addressed. As I mentioned, we are facing a shortage both in jobs that require a significant amount of formal training, like chefs and bakers and those types of careers, but also in the lower skilled occupations. So as far as this requirement for training, I don't necessarily think our industry faces the same challenges that other industries do face. And another, often when we're looking at immigration studies about the cost of retraining these immigrants once they arrive in Canada, as I mentioned, our industry is one of the few industries that actually values foreign training in culinary arts, often above Canadian training in culinary arts because of the needs for ethnic cuisine specialists. So I think that our situation is a little bit different from the traditional numbers you will see.
Thank you. No more questions.
Okay. I'm going to close it then at this point. Mr. Collicott, Mr. Taylor, Mr. Badi, all three of you are obviously very experienced in this topic, and we thank you. On behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank you for your presentations and answering the questions of the committee members. Thank you for coming. This meeting is suspended for a moment. I'd like to reconvene the meeting. We have 3 witnesses. 2 are on via teleconference, and 1 is here in Ottawa. Monsieur Dan Bobat, yes, who represents the Quebec Immigration Lawyers Association. Good morning to you, sir. We have video conference from Hamilton. Professor Arthur Sweetman from the Department of Economics at McMaster University, who appeared also on Bill 11. Good morning, Mr. Sweetman. Can you hear us?
Good morning. I can. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for coming. We have a video conference from Toronto. I see 1 person, but I see 2 names. Felix Zhang. Is that you, sir?
Yes.
Yes. You're the coordinator.
The other one couldn't come.
Excuse me, sir?
Unfortunately, the other representative couldn't come today.
Oh, well, thank you, sir. I'm glad you could. And you are the coordinator of the organization called Sponsor Our Parents?
Yes.
Yes. I'd like to thank, and we will start with Monsieur Bobat. I'll get it before the meeting's over. Thank you, sir. You have up to 8 minutes to make a presentation, sir.
Merci. Je vais faire ma présentation en français.
I will be speaking French. I thank you for having asked me to testify before you. I'm a member of the bar since 1990, and I've practiced immigration law since then. I'm also president of the Quebec Association of Lawyers, of Immigration Lawyers. If we go through to the debate of the backlog, we've noticed that since 2008, the former Minister of Immigration, Diane Finley, had already reported a backlog of 900,000 files. Now, that's 3 years ago. And in 2008, critics for the government blamed the government for having restricted human resources in some of our embassies. As a result, the backlog just increased in some areas as opposed to others. It's interesting now to find out, in this 1 million backlog immigrants, where are they to be found, in which embassies? According to the region, an application is made. There are delays. Some are shorter, some are longer. We probably will realize, fact-wise, that there is a quota given certain regions that would restrict the number of human resources in some of the embassies. As a result, you're limiting the number of individuals who can immigrate to Canada from those regions. Now, in situ, I've noticed a very important trend and a change from 3 years ago in the thinking and the rationale for enforcing our laws, particularly with respect to sponsorship between spouses or war criminals towards citizens and against refugees, and even, if it's not directly related to immigration, with respect to passports. We've seen examples in this past summer through media reports. I didn't see anything. I don't know the reason for this, but I did not see the rationale for punitive measures that are being imposed by the government towards immigrants. And we're beginning to wonder whether we're getting our money's worth. Are we blaming immigrants that would have falsified documents or would have obtained, as the minister says, through fraudulent means, having received a citizenship to the point where we have to conduct investigations to withdraw their citizenship in a process that is very long and costly before the courts? We don't know. We don't have any answers to this. The Minister of Immigration speeches, as well as speeches delivered by public security, seem to be alarming. And we've been warned that, according to polls, half the world population wants to live in Canada. Now, according to him, the situation is only going to get worse. And what we've noticed is that, for example, they would not accept refugees who come to Canada illegally. They assert that those individuals should deal with the UN Commission for Refugees, and very often some of these people are jumping the queue. They're related to terrorists, to arms trafficking, to bringing immigrants illegally. So they're scaring the Canadian people by using those words in their speeches. Now, to my mind, it's quite clear clear that the government's choice is to reassign its resources, not to speed up the selection process, but to question the very status of immigrants that have already been received and to prevent refugees from reaching Canadian soil. Immigrants believe in Canadian values. They come here because Canada has a values, the whole principle of family reunification, as we see it listed under the Immigration Act. Now, if Canada really wants to get the best immigrants in the world, you have to, they have to choose whether or not they're going to sponsor their families, because otherwise it won't be the best ones immigrating to Canada, but the ones that are most desperate financially. The present government's voice questions Canada's credibility internationally, and there are many immigrants that just give up on wanting to remain in Canada. The minister cannot shy away from political choices, thus restricting the staff in embassies and to create a greater and greater backlog in requests, to oblige Canada as a whole to go along with his point of view and solutions to settle the whole issue of backlogs. Nobody can use your own reasoning when you use your own statistics. It goes without saying that the minister seeks more discretionary power. He said so himself when he speaks about ministerial discretion for sponsorship. He wants to shy away from court control from the federal court, to whom he blames for all the ills that are happening. By the same time, he wants judicial independency, and that's the very pillar of our democracy. Immigrants who have paid for to have a request are entitled to a decision. The decision should be fair, impartial, respecting basic fundamental justice. To not respect basic fundamental justice exposes our government to litigation that will cost even more money and will again require more and more resources. The only way for the government is to respect human rights. I therefore call upon this committee to be cautious in recommendations that they will be making to the government, to require more information from the Minister of Immigration in order to really understand what's going on and what is at stake. I thank you.
Sir, Mr. Sweetman.
Thank you very much.
You have up to 8 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and members of the committee for the opportunity to appear. Overall, in characterizing the origin of the immigration backlog, I'm going to use some very approximate numbers for illustrative purposes. Canada currently receives roughly 450,000 applications per year, grants roughly 250,000 admissions, and observes approximately 100,000 unsuccessful files. This leaves an excess of 100,000 applications. It's obvious that if such a context endures, a backlog will accumulate. These numbers also reveal that, relative to its population, Canada has a very large immigration program, in fact, one of the largest of any developed country. My belief is that the substantial scale of this program requires much more careful management than would a smaller one. A superficial analysis suggests a few alternatives to preventing a backlog. The government might take action to, first, increase the number of admissions per year, and/or second, reduce the number of applications, and/or third, increase the number of unsuccessful files. While I recognize that there are several feasible ways to go forward, and that the system is complex, with layers of ministerial instructions, overall and immigration class level annual targets, and immigration class-specific processing priorities, I'm going to put forward a package of 3 proposals for the skilled worker program regarding, first, the elimination of the backlog, second, the operation of the system that does not accumulate a backlog, and finally, I'm going to offer a quite specific recommendation for managing an aspect of the immigration flow. Given time constraints, these can be thought of as examples of a consistent approach to immigration selection. First, regarding the backlog, the current backlog, and focusing on the skilled worker program, I believe that the backlog's existence is problematic to the operation of Canada's immigration system. Further, the associated problems become more serious as time passes. Therefore, I conclude that eliminating it quickly is beneficial. At the national level, the existence of the backlog is detrimental because of its impact on Canada's reputation. the operation of the immigration system, and its negative implications for the labor market. At the individual level, for the new immigrants themselves, that is, I believe there is convincing evidence of an age profile for successful labor market integration. Among immigrants of working age, younger immigrants have better lifetime labor market outcomes. This implies that if an individual sits in the queue for 3 or 4 or 5 years, there's a simultaneous deterioration in that person's ability to integrate into the Canadian labor market, and it reduces that person's lifetime's earnings profile. On the labor market demand side, it also seems credible that during the current period of slow growth following the recent recession, the need for specific occupations, as provided by the ministerial instructions, is reduced relative to that expected in the cyclical upturn that I believe will arrive in a few years. Putting this all together, given that Canada has a legal and a moral obligation to process those in the backlog at some point, this is the time in the business cycle when admitting those who do not have an occupational screen is least detrimental. Moreover, the longer that people in the backlog remain there, the poorer on average their labor market outcomes will be after arrival. This logic immediately leads to my first proposal, imposing very tight restrictions on acceptance of new applications for a short period and processing the existing backlog expeditiously. I'm not talking about any changes to the immigration targets, but simply recommending a new strategy regarding the priority for processing. Assuming we need to address the backlog at some point, it seems sensible to bite the bullet and eliminate it sooner rather than later, since the costs of doing so later are probably larger than doing so at present. Turning to my second proposal, with respect to the ongoing operation without a new backlog being built up, as discussed in the recent evaluation of IRPA, when that legislation was introduced, the thinking behind it was that the flow in the skilled worker program would be managed by adjusting the minimum points required for entry. However, this aspect was never undertaken. Clearly, most agree that it is unfair to change the points threshold after an application is submitted. But with appropriate warning, the points cutoff could be adjusted on an annual basis for each upcoming year, much like the levels are at present. This contrasts with the current government's approach in recent ministerial instructions, which impose a quota. Although a quota may be an important backstop, and it certainly limits the number of applications, it is not necessarily the best first-line treatment, since it does nothing to improve the labor market outcomes of new immigrants, whereas increasing the points threshold would do so. This is important since it's well documented that the new labor market outcomes, the labor market outcomes of new immigrant cohorts have been declining for the past few decades. We should not address the backlog in isolation from other important immigration policy issues, and this proposal has the potential to address the two simultaneously. It's also a return to what was envisioned for this legislation at its onset. Updating the point system to attune it more closely to, for example, Canada's changing demographic situation also seems sensible. However, that's not directly related to the backlog. The third and final part of this set of proposals recognizes the value in making ongoing adjustments to aspects of the immigration program to simultaneously avoid a backlog and improve the efficiency of immigrant selection. I believe that the federal government should get out of the business of selecting immigrants in provincially regulated health professions where a sizable proportion of the workers are funded by provincial governments. Rather, I believe that such workers should be admitted through the provincial nominee programs. At the top of the list for this group would be physicians and nurses. I'm actually making a very narrow proposal here.
If you could wind up, Mr. Sweetman, if you could wind up, please.
Yes, I'm at the very end.
All right.
I'm actually making a very narrow proposal since this is a very special set of occupations given the nature of our Medicare program. Provincial and federal governments are facing substantial challenges integrating international medical graduates into our healthcare system. Domestically, provincial governments have very strict quotas and central control over the number of individuals accepted into Canadian medical schools, since this is one of the primary mechanisms by which Medicare expenditures are managed and simultaneously healthcare services planning is undertaken.
We've got to move on, sir.
Control is lacking. Okay, sorry. It's lacking at the federal level, and shifting this to provincial control would seem to improve efficiency and the backlog. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Zhang, are you there, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the committee for inviting me to speak on behalf of the sponsor of our parents group. My name is Felix Zhang, and I'm the representative of Sponsor Our Parents that has more than 1,500 members across Canada. We are Canadian citizens and permanent residents sponsoring our parents to Canada, and would like to draw attention to the committee to the long-standing issues of imbalanced processing times and the huge backlog in parents and grandparents sponsorship class. Firstly, processing times of parents sponsorship step 2 vary drastically from 6 months to 5 years around the world because Ottawa imposes articulately quotas by country. Why some sponsors have to wait much longer than others just because their parents are living in a different country. We believe this is discrimination against origin, and this must be corrected immediately. We urge CIC to centrally manage the two-step immigration process through a single queue rather than assign quotas by country. This will enable all applications being processed on a first-come, first-served basis, so to ensure the fairness to all sponsors. In addition, CIC should allocate more resources to the longest waiting visa offices to clean up the backlogs and balance processing times among all overseas visa offices. Secondly, the backlog in parents and grandparents sponsorship class has increased dramatically in past few years. As of the end of June 2011, more than 168,000 applicants are waiting for immigration visas or sponsorship approval. Hundreds of thousands of Canadian families are anxiously waiting for reuniting with their parents or grandparents. However, despite the fast-growing backlog and wait time, CIC did a deep cut of the visa quota by 30% in this year. Even the minister has repeatedly promised to keep the same level of previous years. In the last 5 years, the admission quota for parents and grandparents counted between 7 to 8% of all immigration visas. We urge CIC to reverse the recent cut and maintain the same ratio for parents and grandparents in coming years. Thirdly, based on the annual admission quota of this year, the current backlog will require more than 15 years to be processed, which is simply not practical for aging parents. If a reform is necessary in order to reduce the wait time, we urge CIC to ensure the fairness, consistency, and transparency of any changes. Today, I would like to take this opportunity to present a few very practical and feasible solutions suggested by our members. The most popular one is that parents should have higher priority because they are closer family members than grandparents, brothers, and sisters. This is very reasonable and widely supported by group members. The second one is that aging parents without child living in the same country should have higher priority because they are much more vulnerable than others who are younger or have children living in the same country to take care of them. Their applications should be fast-tracked. The third one is that only Canadian citizens or permanent residents living in Canada for a minimum of 3 years are eligible sponsors. This will ensure sponsors have a long-term plan to stay here and contribute to Canadian economics. There are other suggestions, such as collect an upfront health premium from the sponsor and then give tax refund over the 10-year sponsorship period. This will allow the government to enforce the sponsor's minimum financial requirements and ensure the tax revenue from the sponsors. Parents and grandparents reunification is very important to new Canadians. The extreme long wait time will not only make other immigration programs less attractive, but also leave new immigrants no choice but moving back home to take care of their parents. This will definitely have negative impact on the efficiency and effectiveness of Canadians' immigration practice and policy. Just recently, a group member from Brampton said he applied for the sponsorship 4 years ago, but his father passed away since then. He couldn't wait any longer and decided to sell all his assets in Canada and move back home to take care of his mother. He said his parents would have brought substantial money to Canada and contributed to Canadian economics. This could have been a win-win situation, but if his application was processed fast enough. But unfortunately, Canadian government and himself both failed. In short, we are very frustrated with the current practice of the family sponsorship immigration and urge CIC to provide fair, responsible, and practical solutions to ensure all applications being processed within an equitable and reasonable time frame around the world. Thank you.
And thank you, sir, for your presentation. Now, members of the committee will have some questions of all of you. Mr. Menengatis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our presenters here today. Thank you for being here and presenting to us. I'd like to talk a little bit about how we got here. Backlogs at the moment, as we all know, are about 1 million plus people. 800,000 some odd, a little bit higher than 800,000, of which the Conservative government inherited in 2006. It's a huge backlog. We need to deal with it. Looking at hearing some of the comments here today, I'm going to direct my first question to Mr. Zhang. I understand the requirement for families to want to bring their parents and their grandparents over. To what number would you suggest, Mr. Zhang? We need to have a concrete number on what we're talking about here.
We are suggesting to lock the ratio rather than absolutely number. So in previous years, the ratio is about 7 to 8% of all immigrants' visa. We are suggesting to keep this ratio for the years coming.
Last year, 280,000 new Canadians were welcomed to the country. That was a historic number, as we heard previously stated here. 250,000 has been the average over the last 5 years from this government. Do you believe there are practical, and I'm going to direct my questions to Mr. Sweetman and Mr. Zhang in particular, as I found Mr. Bobo's comments to have been highly partisan. I don't care to ask any questions.
Mr. Menengatis, you can't make comments about witnesses. That's most inappropriate.
All right, well, I apologize then, Mr. Chair. But there were many comments made about the minister and his absence.
Proceed with your questions. I'm just not going to. I'm concerned, and I'm not even going to stop the clock on this. You know better.
My question is regarding the practical limits as to how many people we can actually allow into the country every year. That's my question. What would be your feedback on the practical limits of allowing how many people we can allow into the country every year? Mr. Sweetman, Mr. Zhang.
So perhaps I could go first.
Sure.
I don't know that we have an answer to that question. Canada right now is among the top 2 or 3 countries in the world, developed countries in the world, in terms of the percentage of population that we allow in. We know that in our society over the last 30 years or so, there's been a very sharp and marked decline in the labor market outcomes of new immigrants who are arriving. So we've seen a decline. It's very difficult to say a number, especially given how we allocate that number across various classes. So if you were talking about increasing the percentage of skilled worker principal applicants, that's a very different thing than talking about parents and grandparents. I think we want to be very cautious. I also believe that we don't necessarily want to have an annual limit. I'm one of those people who believes that we should have a total over the course of a business cycle, and that we should adjust our limits with the business cycle to allow economic integration. And we know that economic integration is more successful when people land, and we also know that people stay in Canada rather than returning or going to some third country if they land at the peak of a cycle versus a recession. So I don't think this is a simple question, and I don't think we know the answer with any certainty. Thank you.
Hi, it's Felix. I don't have a number, say how many we should admit each year, but what I believe is that once we admit skilled workers, for example, they have their parents living in their home country. So if we don't have a local ratio, say like 7 to 8% for the past few years, if we keep cutting that ratio, that means more and more new immigrants, they won't be able to reunite their parents in Canada. In that way, they have to go back home to take care of their parents. And I think the immigration policy should allow us to bring our parents here so we can stay here for a longer term. Otherwise, it's going to be a short-term stay, and we have to go. I think that's not the right direction for this country. Thank you.
A previous witness to our committee had suggested that people should provide the government with $75,000 if they want to bring their parents or grandparents to Canada in order to cover the cost of social services over their time here. What do you think of this suggestion? And do you think that $75,000 seems like a fair amount? Why or why not?
Directed to somebody.
Hi, it's Felix. So our group members against this idea. I don't know where this 75,000 number comes from, but we opted the suggestion of charge non-refundable health premium. That means it will create a fast-tracker queue for rich people and treats the others as second-class citizens. So if that idea stands, does that mean we should charge a premium for patients if they want to be wait less, and just let other people to wait longer? This is unfair.
Mr. Sweetman, do you care to comment on that?
So this is in some sense in line with what Canada has done for a long time in asking families or sponsors of family class refugees to guarantee that the people won't be responsible, that the new immigrants won't be responsible for social assistance burden on our society. I think we can push this too far, however, and make immigration something for the rich rather than something for a general population. So I think we need to be this is consistent with what Canada has done in the past on some dimensions, but it's something that we need to be careful about because we can certainly push it too far.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetman. Ms. Bison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mon premier question est pour Monsieur Bobo.
My first question would be for Mr. Bobbitt. We have about 2 minutes, I would think, to deal with each witness. As an immigration lawyer, what do you feel are the impediments with respect to immigration? The backlog with respect to what?
The actual backlog.
The backlog?
Mm-hmm. What would you attribute the backlog to?
Well, there's always been a backlog in immigration. This is nothing new. The difference is in the quantity, really. So it's only accumulating. So in 2002, when they changed, they implemented IRPA, there was already a backlog. And the then government had decided that, well, they were no longer going to process the old files, they're going to just start with the new ones. And that led to class action, and the government lost. So I think that's why I think that government has to be really careful how they will try to eliminate the current backlog.
So do you feel that the backlog has significantly increased because of the ministerial instructions that happened, or are you?
No, I'm not saying that. The backlog has always existed.
Yeah.
And the ministerial instructions are trying to address part of that backlog. definitely yes.
Okay. My next question is for Mr. Sweetman. It seems that we've both moved on from Queens, Mr. Sweetman. You mentioned that the longer people wait in the backlog, it significantly decreases their ability to integrate well into Canadian society. So given the labour market needs that have been raised by the Citizenship and Immigration Canada, that in about 5 years we'll need 100% of our labour market demands will need to be filled by immigrants, can you comment on how Canada will be able to attract the skilled workers that we need if we place limitations on family reunification?
So that's a multifaceted question. I think Canada has never had any trouble attracting immigrants. That's why we have a backlog. So I don't think Canada will have trouble attracting immigrants in the future. I don't think that's really an issue. The issue is, in some sense, dealing with the backlog and selecting immigrants who will have a successful labour market outcomes. I think that's a challenge we face. I think my second proposal about increasing the points threshold for the skilled worker program addresses that point to some extent. I think if we increase that threshold, we'll simultaneously decrease the size of the backlog. So I think we can deal with that, at least for skilled workers, in a relatively straightforward way, although it will take some political courage to undertake that.
But Mr. Sweetman, if I may, most of the immigrant communities that I'm well versed with the Scarborough community is people who enjoy and feel that extended families are a value to their individual families as well as community. So if we're trying to attract skilled workers to fill our labor market needs, how is it that we're going to be able to continue to attract the good, the best and the brightest of the world if we're telling them that they may not be able to bring their parents or family with them?
So you may have noticed in asking me the question again that I never really answered that part of your question.
Exactly.
I think it's true that one of the advantages that Canada offers to new immigrants is our family class with the provision that parents and grandparents can immigrate. And it's a matter of doing that in an appropriate way. I personally don't have a big problem with increasing the family class size a little bit, but there are limits to what we want to do in terms of costs that our society wishes to bear. Personally, I think the diversity that immigration brings to our society and that parents and grandparents bring to our society merit those costs.
Thank you, Mr. Sweetman. And for Mr. Zhang, you've mentioned also that we have a very imbalanced processing with respect to families and who are waiting from different visa offices. And last week we had a witness who also mentioned the same thing. Depending on which visa office they're applying to, that they end up waiting from 14 months to 55 months for their family to be reunited or for their application to be processed. What are your ideas about the actual imbalance with the processing time, and what are your ideas for improving the situation?
Yeah, this issue has been there for a long time, and our suggestion is to manage the queue through manage all applications through a single queue, rather than assigning quotas to visa offices. So if we could manage all applications at step 1, and once step 1 passed, if there's no queue at each visa offices, that means all processing times, the processing times for all sponsors will be pretty much the same.
Thank you, Felix.
That's our suggestion.
Thank you. And also, if you could also elaborate, because you're from a community organization that's about sponsoring our parents and grandparents, can you elaborate on the consequences that we'll be facing on capping or putting quotas on the actual immigration of parents and grandparents?
Currently, the backlog is already is huge, and it's not practical for aging parents. If we are putting caps onto new applications or or further reduce the annual admission quota, that will hurt the community. And the people staying here, they have a longer-term plan. But if such thing happens, it leaves the new immigrants no choice to leave, and simply it's going to hurt Canada. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to reiterate that one example that you used about a Brampton man who has now liquidated all of his assets in Canada and moved outside of the country because his parents weren't able to be reunited. And I think that type of example is happening all across the country. And by not allowing our parents and grandparents into this country, I guess your example and many of the other examples is that we're actually seeing an economic net loss rather than a net profit by not allowing more immigrants, families to come into this country.
Thank you. Mr. Lamoureux.
Exactly.
Mr. Sweetman, wanted to follow up. You emphasized a lot in terms of age and economics. In terms of, if you take a look at the family class sponsor, in particular with the parents, many of these parents are relatively young. You know, they'd be late 40s, early 50s, and they'll have dependents that they'll be coming with. Now, you tack on to a lengthy processing backlog time. So, for example, you might have a 51-year-old couple who have 17 to 21-year-olds living in their home. You tack on that processing times. Can you give some insight in terms of how your take on something of that nature? I'm thinking in terms of their productivity and how we might be denying that productivity by having that lengthy waiting time. Is it better for us to establish a separate stream for that type of parent?
I don't know if we want to establish a separate stream or not. I think we want to. I think the first person was arguing for a global stream, and I think we're moving that way with our global case management system, which I think will be a big improvement for Canada's capacity to deal with people fairly around the world. In terms of age at immigration, I think it's reasonably well established in the research literature that there's an important relationship between age at arrival and long-term labor market outcomes. And I think that younger immigrants, on average, do much better and find it easier to integrate socially and economically into Canada. So I think we want to be thinking about that quite a lot in terms of the delays that we're imposing on people in the backlog. For parents and grandparents, it depends on whether or not they actually intend to enter the Canadian labor force. One of the things that was suggested earlier for people not interested in entering the labor force is long-term multiple admission visas, and that's perhaps an alternative that we might want to think about in this for that particular subset of individuals.
Sure. What about the internal policy the government has in terms of if you're a 21-year, 22-year-old and you're just beginning that process as a parent, you can expect to be in the process, as say, for 7+ years now, and you're obligated not to go into the work environment because then you lose your dependent status. You have to stay in some sort of a public educational facility. Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing, or should we look at changing that particular issue? I realize it's a bit off topic, but we're talking about the age.
Yes, I'm not entirely sure I understand what you mean by losing status. For people who have immigrated to Canada, once they've immigrated, status is irrelevant. And we know that the spouses and dependents of the skilled worker principal applicants look very similar to the spouses and partners and parents and grandparents of people who enter in the family class. So one of the things we might want to be thinking about is this comparability of individuals across classes who are in some sense similar. So what I'm saying is spouses and dependents of the skilled workers look like the spouses and dependents and parents coming in family class.
Yeah, I'm suggesting that
sometimes make these artificial.
Yeah, I'm suggesting that we need to even think outside of the backlog in regards to your comments, in regards to economics and age. If I'm a 24-year-old dependent with my principal applicant, my father, and he has to wait 7 years, I cannot work. I have to stay in school. That requires a government regulation change that would enable me to remain a dependent and still be in the workforce back in my home country while my case is being processed, if you follow what I mean.
Actually, sorry, I understand your question now. I'm afraid I'm not familiar enough with the details. Is it the age at the time of entry that matters, or age at the time of application that matters for dependents?
Age
I don't actually...
Sure. Sure, it's actually age at the time of entry. You have to be attending a publicly accredited educational facility, or you'll be classified as an independent, and you'll have to put in your own application, start the process all over again.
Right. So I was not aware of that, but it makes good sense that it would work that way, and that implies that there are important implications for dependents of being in the queue for an extended period, especially dependents who are older children at the time of application. That's actually a very important ramification of having a long backlog that I hadn't thought about before.
Yes. I appreciate your comment. I don't know how much time I have, Mr. Chair.
You don't have any time, I'm sorry.
Thank you for your time, all presenters.
Mr. Dykstra and Mr. Weston.
Mr. Sweetman, I just wanted to get, appreciated the sort of the 3 points that you had to make. One of the difficulties we sometimes have is really getting our witnesses to drive through to recommendations that deal with the backlogs. I know it's difficult for folks because they do want to talk about issues that are in the current queue, but what we're really trying to study here is the reduction and work through backlogs. And you know, one of the issues that you touched on, and I wondered if you could give me a brief and more detailed answer, and that is, when we ended up with this system in 2002 of accepting absolutely every application, whichever category it came under, that Canada was obligated to follow through with each one of those applications. Do you think that we're at the point now where we need to change that system? We need to find a way to work through in a proper way that gets to the economic development that you're speaking of, while keeping a balance of ensuring that that families are in fact able to spend their lives together. Great. Just let him know that he's...
Sorry, can you hear me now?
We can. You got to press the button, sir. Who's got the button?
Okay, is it working?
Yeah.
Mr. Sweetman, you have to press the button.
Sorry, I did. I've been pressing. Can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay. Sorry about that. I think we've already done in the economic class immigration what you recommend through the ministerial instructions by imposing quotas, especially for the skilled worker category. So in part your question, half of it's already been accomplished. And the real issue that I think you're questioning is whether we should impose similar quotas for family class. And I don't know, that's a moral question rather than an economic question. Whether people believe that having parents come is particularly important. I think for individuals in our society it is. For recent immigrants it's very important to have their parents come. And the question we have to ask ourselves as a society is how much we're willing to bear the risk of healthcare costs associated with those parents and grandparents.
Do you think that individuals, we all make decisions in life with respect to a priority scale that we work through and determine the outcome of which one of those priorities allows us to make decisions. Do you think the priority for an individual who is determining to come to Canada to become a permanent resident, eventually a Canadian citizen, their priority number one is to bring their family here, like their parents and their grandparents, or do you think that their priority lies more within the potential for themselves to develop their careers, that they're not able to do so in their country of origin, and the fact that they want to bring their children here for a better opportunity, a better life within Canada?
I suspect that there's a wide diversity of opinions and desires across the thousands and thousands of people who are entering, and that some are less interested in bringing their parents, but for many of them, bringing parents is quite important. So I don't think there's a single answer to that. I think there's quite a wide, heterogeneous answer.
Appreciate that. Thanks. Alex, it sort of brings me to, Felix, it sort of brings me to the question that's I have for you. I know that you made a presentation when we dealt with wait times, and in fact your presentation was almost identical at that time as it is now. We had hoped to have folks come here to speak specifically to the backlogs and those reductions and recommendations that you would make respecting those reductions, or at least trying to deal through the backlogs. So I'm sorry if we weren't clear enough in terms of what we are expecting with respect to a presentation. I do have the same question to you as I've asked Mr. Sweetman, and that is, your presentation and your focus is heavily laden on your issue with respect to parents and grandparents. you do understand that citizenship and immigration is a very multidimensional ministry, and that immigration isn't solely focused on the issue that you are bringing to the table.
We totally understand that.
So why is it that why is it that this is the only issue that you bring to the table versus, I'd like to, I mean, I know I don't have the time here, but it'd be interesting to see why you made the determination to bring yourself and your family here to Canada for a better life, obviously, and how that has worked out for you. I'd love to sit down with you sometime and do that. But I'd really like to get a clear understanding in the other categories. Why did you make the decision to come to this country? Is it, in fact, one that is better for your immediate family, for you, for your wife, for your children?
Yes, I came to Canada about 10 years ago as a skilled worker, and that's my personal experience. And because today I'm representing a group sponsored our parents. Basically, we are a group that sponsoring our parents to Canada. That's the reason. I only talk about the long.
Sorry, Alex. I just
category.
Felix. Sorry, I didn't want to get. I appreciate the fact that I know you've got a great story, and it's an important one.
I have a point of order. Mr. Dykstra asked the witness a question why he came here, and asked about his immediate family, and the witness is starting to answer.
No,
as soon
I didn't.
He starts answering, he gets interrupted.
No, I didn't. That wasn't my question.
Actually, you did, and it's a valid point of order.
Okay.
I'll let the witness finish. Mr. Zhang, if you could continue what you're saying.
Thank you. So the reason of I'm only talk about the issue about parents and the grandparents because I'm speaking on behalf of the sponsor of parents group. So our group is focusing on this class, and we don't. We understand that Canada is interested in bringing skilled workers to backfill the vacancy of the workforce, but also if parents family reunification is very important to new immigrants, and simply I think government should give us a choice of which family members we want to sponsor. It could be child, could be spouse, could be parents. But eliminating or capping the parents' category is not a solution, we believe.
Time's up.
Thank you.
I'm afraid that's it, Mr. Dykstra. Mr. Zhang, Professor Sweetman, Mr. Babo, thank you for your contribution that you've made. It's a difficult subject that we're into, and you have contributed to that, and we thank you for it. Thank you very much for coming. This committee is adjourned.